Viewer discretion advised. Warning to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers that this video contains images of Indigenous people who have passed away. Race, miscegenation and colonial power, the legacy of settler colonization. Hello and welcome. In today's video, we explore how ideas of race, miscegenation and racial purity shaped settler colonial societies such as Australia, New Zealand and the United States. This video will aim to inform our viewers on the origins of racial mixing fears, the removal of Indigenous children, the implications of pseudoscientific ideologies such as Arthur D. Gobineau's an essay on the equalities of the human races, and colonial power structures that continue to echo in the modern world, like colorism. This video will focus on 7 questions to help understand this topic. These questions will consist of: what is miscegenation and why were concerns about miscegenation such a significant factor in settler colonial jurisdictions? Why has racial purity a key ingredient in the burgeoning sense of white settler nationhood in Australia? What do genetic tests of ancient settlers in Europe show about the concept of pure Aryan race? Is there such thing as racial purity? What is colorism? How does it manifest itself today? Why is it not possible to separate the stereotypes of colorism from the misogyny and the sexual exploitation inherent in white settler colonisms? And in American slavery, why were Indigenous people of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous ancestry considered both a problem and an opportunity in the Australian context? How did notions of racial purity and the white Australia underpin the forced removal of Indigenous children from their families? And in what sense did the policies of assimilation attempt to eliminate indigeneity at both biological and cultural levels? Firstly, a brief introduction to a key term of this video, miscegenation. Understanding the significance of this term is crucial. Miscegenation is a term coined in the 19th century to describe interracial relationships, particularly those between white people and people from other races. In settler colonial societies such as Australia, miscegenation provided deep fears because it challenged the myth of racial purity, which was extremely important to colonial beliefs. In those jurisdictions, white settlers believed that racial boundaries ensured social, political and moral order. Any crossing of those lines, especially involving white women, was seen as a threat to white supremacy. As Vicky Luca notes, mixed-race individuals, referred to as half-castes, were viewed with suspicion and sometimes even revulsion. They were proof of transgression, embodying both colonial anxieties and the failure to maintain racial hierarchies. Why was racial purity essential to white settler nationhood in Australia? In Australia, racial purity became a national project through the implementation of the White Australia policy, which sought to build a society consisting of only white people or European heritage. Racial purity was seen as vital to achieving unity, progress and civility. These values were what settler governments thought could only be achieved with whiteness. Miscegenation was thus not merely a personal matter, but a political one. Aboriginal people, especially those of mixed descent, were portrayed as obstacles to national cohesion. Settlers were very convinced of the idea that half-castes and could be assimilated over generations of so-called breeding out the colour, but only through careful control of marriage and reproduction. The various acts to assimilate Indigenous people made it clear that the settler government of Australia would be happy with the extinction of its people. What did genetic tests of ancient Europeans reveal about the Aryan race? The idea of the Aryan race, the idea that was central to Nazi ideology and the colonial racial theories, claimed that Europeans descended from a purer, superior stock. However, modern genetic science dismantles this myth. As reported in National Geographic, genetic tests of ancient European populations show a long history of many people from all different areas mixing with each other. Groups such as hunter-gatherers, Anatolian farmers, and Central Asian herders all migrated from different parts of the globe and would all breed with each other. This complex ancestry refutes the notion of racial purity. There is no genetically pure race. All humans are mixtures shaped by migration and cultural exchange. The very foundation of racial purity is biologically flawed. Understanding this is crucial. It exposes how ridiculous it was that pseudoscience was used to justify colonial domination, forced removals, and segregation. Today's genetic evidence makes it clear that race is an idea created by society and is not a biological fact. And this is just an image from the National Geographic article showing how European migration in very early days of human society. What is colorism and how is it rooted in colonialism and slavery? Colorism refers to the prejudice or discrimination against individuals with darker skin tones, often within the same ethnic or racial group. As The Guardian explains, colorism is a legacy of slavery and colonialism, where lighter skin was equated with beauty, intelligence, and desirability because it was more closely resembled to whiteness. During slavery in the US, lighter-skinned enslaved people, often the product of rape by slave owners, were given better treatment. This is an explanation of why a racialized hierarchy within black communities exists today in many aspects of their lives, such as hiring rates, media representation, and perceived beauty. Why are Indigenous people of mixed ancestry seen as both a problem and an opportunity in Australia? Indigenous people who were racially mixed were in an unclear predicament in colonial Australia. On one hand, they were seen as a threat to racial boundaries and white supremacy. On the other, they were considered a solution to the so-called Aboriginal problem. The Australian government imagined that by encouraging or enforcing marriage between half-caste, so like mixed race, women and white men, the Aboriginal bloodline could be diluted. Officials like A.O. Neville promoted this policy of assimilation through miscegenation, claiming that it would eventually eliminate the Aboriginal identity. But this strategy was ignored. This strategy ignored the culture and rights of Indigenous people. It treated mixed-race individuals as tools for achieving a white future and not as real people. How did racial purity and white Australia policy relate to child removal? The forced removal of Indigenous children, now known as the Stolen Generations, was directly linked to the ideology of racial purity. Children of mixed descent were targeted because they were seen to be able to assimilate into white society. By placing these children in white institutions or adoptive homes, the government sought to erase Aboriginal identity, not just culturally, but biologically. Policymakers argued that within a few generations, Aboriginal ancestry would disappear. Critics might argue that some officials believed they were rescuing children from poverty or neglect, but as Luca's writing shows, the rationale was often a cover for racial engineering. Even well-meaning actors worked within a system designed to decimate the Indigenous population to achieve racial purity. How did assimilation aim to eliminate indigeneity biologically and culturally? Assimilation policies worked in biological and cultural areas. Biologically, they encouraged interracial relationships with the intent of reducing the visible signs of Aboriginal heritage. Culturally, they removed children from their communities and banned them from performing acts such as their native language and traditions. Institutions taught children white customs, values, and often made them ashamed of their origins. By the 20th century, the goal of the policy was not to just coexist, but to absorb the Indigenous peoples into white Australia. And this, of course, eventually caused cultural genocide. To conclude, the myth of racial purity has shaped laws, policies, and personal lives across settler colonial societies. Miscegenation was feared not because it was uncommon, but because it exposed how fragile colonial ideologies were. From child removals in Australia to the legacy of colorism today, it's evident how deeply these ideas have infiltrated modern life. However, modern science and historical truth both reject the notion of pure races and can hopefully be challenged further as time goes on. Thank you for watching. This is just quickly the reference list.